I want to develop a welding process to join titanium to steel, strong enough that it can be used for some crazy blades. This is part 2 of that journey. To recap, the reason this is so difficult is titanium and steel, when they are bonded at a high temperature, react and form brittle intermetallic compounds, nowhere near strong enough for a blade. My current hypothesis, based on reams of paperwork, is to work around this, we need the use of an interlayer that acts as a barrier between the steel and the titanium. In our first episode, we tested copper, nickel, silver, and gold. We got some interesting results, but we've got to go further. And so thanks to your suggestions in the comments, we have even more materials to play with. But in order to get them to bond, we need to do it in an inert atmosphere, so we need to make a bunch of small little boxes to pump argon through. And fortunately, we had a useful delivery turn-up that might help us save some time. This is a 4-foot by 4-foot plasma CNC table. It's made by Extreme Plasma. They've very kindly provided it for us to use on the channel. And not only that, the actual plasma cutter for the CNC table is from Artec, provided by them. It's their P101D. I first bought one of their welders over 11 years ago. Down here is our 4-year-old manual plasma cutter I purchased. They recently gave us this 3-in-1 MIG-TIG stick machine. And after a day and a half of tinkering, we had this thing up and running, cutting steel like a dream. We even plasma cut out a little shelf to store the electronics. And now we're gonna use it to cut some material for our boxes. All right, go time. Done. That'll do. 10 more, please. We've got a bunch of boxes that need filling, and this is what we've got to work with. A ton of nickel and more. Zirconium. See the price of that? And that's cheap compared to the next one. Niobium. What? Disgustingly expensive. This is the first time I've ever seen niobium. Wow. Would you look at that? That's wild. That looks just like metal. More tests on copper, and with the addition of some control samples this time around, I've got my bloody work cut out for me. It's now on to our material prep. Righto, we've got most of our material prepped. As you can see in this example, 2mm nickel interlayer. The steel is going to be in the middle. This is our grade 2 or commercially pure titanium. This is grade 5, so it has some aluminium and vanadium in the alloy. And to remind you of how these sandwiches are going to be concocted, the steel is going to be in the middle, because that's the whole purpose of this. I want the steel to be the edge of whatever blade we can make. Our interlayer goes either side, jacketed with grade 2 and then grade 5 titanium. One of the things I failed to do in the first episode was include any control samples. What good is a test if we can't compare it to something? I want to compare it to billets of just steel and billets of just titanium. And of course, we've got a special one to try, an idea from one of the world's foremost experts on diffusion bonding, but we're gonna get to that later. For now, everything needs to be degreased, cleaned up, spotless, and assembled into our forbidden lollipops. I've got 9 cans ready to go, and let me tell you why we went with these materials and thicknesses. In the last episode, I thought the winning interlayer was the 2mm copper. However, you guys in the comments spotted something that I didn't. Our 2mm nickel samples fractured with a lot less delamination than any of our copper samples when they fractured. And so we're continuing our experimentation with nickel with a wider range of thicknesses, as well as our original 2mm. Of course, we've still got a sample of 2mm copper, what I thought was the winner from last time. We've also picked zirconium and niobium because I've heard them referenced, and because niobium has the closest coefficient of thermal expansion to titanium of any of the other interlayers we have tried. And so the hypothesis there is that once it's bonded, it's going to be creating far fewer internal stresses in the material as it cools down, hopefully reducing the chance of any fractures. Get the argon running, turn it way down. Billet 1 is 2mm nickel. The gases are flowing, in she goes. In the previous set of experiments, I started with the hydraulic press. And I squeezed it, put it back in the fire, and then took it to the Stanco power hammer to forge it out. This time around, I'm actually just gonna go ahead and completely skip the hydraulic press part. I'm going to go straight to the 200-weight Massey steam hammer.
Because I don't think the hydraulic press did a whole lot.
Relative to the normal temperatures I forge at, this is really cold.
850 Celsius is not a lot. This thing will do some serious metal squishing when the material's like 1200 degrees.
It'll even do some metal squirting.
But I noticed the amount of deformation we were getting in that past attempt was so low, and what is incredibly critical for us is as much pressure as possible because we have such a short bonding time. When in industry or in research they are doing diffusion bonding,
They're doing bonding times of 15 minutes to many, many hours. And that's typically so that they can use relatively low pressures
in order to have the least amount of deformation at the bonding area, which is incredibly important for a lot of the highly precise parts that diffusion bonding is used to make, like turbine blades in aeroplanes. You don't want to be deforming that stuff. But we're not set up to be able to hold our material at pressure, at temperature, for that amount of time.
And so in this case, less time means more power.
Righto, Christmas season. Hopefully that means you have some time off work, some time to relax, sit on your bum, hopefully watch some of our YouTube videos, and when you've run out, log on to your favorite streaming services for a little entertainment there. Once you've demolished the catalog of content that's available for you in your country, why don't you go ahead and use today's sponsor, NordVPN, to open up a whole new world of content to stream that you wouldn't otherwise be able to see. Now this is possible because in their app for iOS, Android, Mac and PC, you can decide exactly what country the websites you browse think you're browsing from. What NordVPN also does for you is give you a little extra security while you're browsing the internet because they encrypt the data that goes between you and their servers, meaning that nobody can do a man-in-the-middle attack. And your internet service provider or a nefarious government can't see the data that's going back and forth between you and the websites that you browse. Right now, every purchase of a 2-year plan will get a huge discount, plus 4 additional months for free when you go to nordvpn.com/forge. The link is in the description below. It's risk-free with their 30-day money-back guarantee, and I've been loving it for the past 6 or 7 years at this point, using it almost every single day. On with the compressor. Here we go! Billet 2. Billet 3. Interesting. That one blew up the box, the other ones didn't. We're now on to billet 9. This is our control sample in steel. Is this about to be the lowest temperature I have ever heard of steel being forge welded? I'm interested in seeing what happens at 850 degrees Celsius, because typically we don't forge weld steel in an inert atmosphere. But will this allow us to do it at crazy low temperatures? I tell you what, also, this steam hammer is not liking this cold material. It's moving my dies all over the place, so it does tell me a couple of things. It tells me that probably the fit up of the dies isn't perfect, but also, poor thing, just like, please, give me some hotter material. So that's all 9. We are missing the last one, the mystery recipe. I'm gonna get to that one a little bit later when we approach the quenching stage of our experiment with any of the successful samples that we have.
You're some funny dogs.
Funny dogs. For now, we've got to get all these cut off from the pipes and begin sectioning them down into samples that we can actually test. Progress is being made. Steel jacket's already popped off on this one. And I've got to say, I am bloody chuffed that we now have this setup in the workshop, because this is going to solve so many precise bandsaw cutting problems. He says that while looking at a fairly wonky cut, to be honest. The vice fixture is obviously way overbuilt. It could probably be made out of a machining angle plate and probably be cheaper than the raw material cost of this block, because that's a few $100. But it's what I had lying around, so I think it's likely that the vice has just found itself quite an expensive home, and these things will just live together permanently. I'm just happy as Larry about that. In terms of order of operations, I'm at a little bit of a crossroads, because I am gonna want to slice these pieces into 3, so that we have 3 samples to test from. But we also need to break off the steel jacket and get everything to an even thickness. Last time on the water jet samples, we did it once they had all been completely cut down to size. This time around, I'm going to break off the steel jacket, mill them to thickness before cutting them into the 3 final pieces that'll give us 3 test samples from each one. Oh no! We got a fracture from just the punching. And the steel came off. Ooh, hello, we're learning things. Well, if it can't handle that, it's no good. Ouch! Early failure for billet 2, eh? Oh
Oh no! Early failure on billet 6 as well. Oh, bad. Ow, that's my hand.
Oh, yes. That's so good. Woo! Before we take the jacket off of this, billet 9, our control, steel, remember that what we're looking at is steel that has been forge welded or diffusion bonded at 850 degrees Celsius. Orders of magnitude lower temperature than I have ever welded steel before, and I am completely shocked that this is possible.
I didn't believe in the slightest that this was going to work. But what this tells me is that in a good enough atmosphere, with as little oxidation as possible, remarkable things are possible. However, just looking at it visually, I don't know if you can see,
But to me, it looks like you can see a little line at the joint between the steel box that we bonded to the 1080 that did not have the same rigorous surface grinding and cleaning done to it. And so, if I can break that mild steel box off,
it tells me that provided you clean well enough, you can do crazy low temperature forge welds in steel. Oh my goodness, we are peeling it off. Yeah, look at that. That is so fascinating. You can see the discoloration here at the joint interface where that unclean oxidized box hasn't properly bonded there. The areas that were much harder to peel off did not have that same discoloration. The backside is not peeling at all, and that just tells you how close the margins of success and failure can be. One side of this billet, the jacket bonded really nicely. The other side of the billet, it did not. We're gonna have to mill off the jacket. Got the wall machined to the same thickness, all while keeping the central layer in the middle. There are a few irregularities that in testing could cause stress concentrations, but hopefully we can go ahead and work around it. Next step, slice them all in 3. Now that they're all flat, this should be super easy to set up. First test is gonna be the good old bend, because that did provide interesting observations. This is just a bit of mild steel that I got from the scrap pile. I think it would be cool if we actually got some numbers here, eh? We did something like this. Will you be able to see anything?
I think you will.
Sample 1. Oh, yeah, baby, that's pretty good, huh? 2. Oh my gosh, that's hard. 3. This is great. 4. Oh! It delaminated a little bit and then just popped out. 4, take 2. Oh, it's cracking. Impressive. It has a little bit of delamination propagating up on the bend. It's on the outer edge. That's between the grade 5 and the grade 2 titanium. 5. Oh. 2mm copper was my favorite last time. Not good. That's the grade 5 titanium snapping. That actually has nothing to do with our titanium to steel bond. It has nothing to do with our interlayer. That's just the grade 5. If I go back a little bit, yeah, interlayer. I believed in you. 6, the zirconium. Yep. Did not like it. Looks like the zirconium stuck to the titanium, but the zirconium did not stick to the steel. 7, niobium. Oh, that's good. Very promising. Titanium control, 8. She's out of here. Grade 5 popped from the compressive forces. Number 9, steel control. Oh, it's like butter. That's so funny.
I thought steel would be stronger than that. There's obviously tons of flaws in this experiment, but one I just noticed reviewing the footage to get the data is
the crane scale wasn't always square to the wrench. It was sometimes like this instead of like that, which is obviously
going to be making some flawed numbers, so I tried to pick the frames
where this was closer to square
when I selected the reading of the yield bending and peak bending force. And what's cool to see is that it looks like we have 2 competitors in terms of the best interlayer, just switching back and forth on their max peak force and their max yield force. Our 0.05mm nickel interlayer and our 0.5mm nickel interlayer, they both performed really well. Weird! For test number 2, we are going to harden and temper all our samples to see if they can withstand a heat treat, but it didn't take long for us to find a failure. Our zirconium and niobium samples both broke
right after hardening.
I was looking closer at the broken zirconium and niobium, and this is fascinating. There must have been some crazy stresses in the material, because after it broke, look at the shape that it's taken. It ripped itself apart because clearly the internal stresses were enormous. And I think that this outer layer here, which would have been our titanium, was in so much tension that it just plook. It's similar, but to a lesser extent on the niobium as well.
Let's try and work out why. So the zirconium was worse, and look at this. It has the lowest CTE. The niobium was less bad. It's got to be something to do with the CTE. My brain is going to be on the rev limiter trying to figure this out.
So this illustrates our steel, our lowest CTE metals like the zirconium and the niobium, and our titanium.
If they start like this at room temperature, when they heat up, the steel expands to that, our zirconium niobium only expands to this, and our titanium somewhere in the middle. The atoms then get bonded together in that position. So when it cools, the steel is trying to shrink and is putting an enormous compressive load on the niobium. And what does that look like? So what does that mean when the bond breaks? Right? No. Did I get it wrong? I'm so lost. It's bending the other way. I've determined this is a question better posed to you guys. I think I've just gone ahead and confused myself. Would love to hear from somebody that understands this stuff better. What's going on inside those joints?
These puppies have been tempered, so it's about time we tackle this.
So last week, I went to university. Strange place for somebody like me to be, given that I have 0 seconds of higher education, and I didn't even finish the regular one. But just a few hours down the road, at the Open University in Milton Keynes, is one of the world's foremost experts in diffusion bonding, and that is Dr. Shirzadi. He very kindly gave me some time out of his busy day to discuss this topic, show me the type of stuff that he's worked on, and I got to see his awesome laboratory with just the coolest machines, and we had several hours of fascinating discussion. You wouldn't believe the amount of things that hold civilization together that exist because of diffusion bonding technology. I wish I could share that discussion with you because it was utterly fascinating, but he very kindly gave me some thought starters on our project of bonding steel to titanium. And it wasn't what I expected. He opened up this paper, which you can find online, and this is some of his research on bonding stainless steel to titanium. And if you look at his tensile strength results, you will see that with a nickel interlayer, the optimum bonding temperature was 850 degrees Celsius with a 60-minute bond time, but a direct bond with no interlayer was even stronger. And I'm like, what on earth is going on? But what about the intermetallics? We've been at war with the intermetallics for months. We've seen it every time titanium sticks to steel in our experiments. We can just pop it right off. And we know that's because when the titanium reacts with the iron in the steel, it's brittle as all get out. Well, let's have a little look here. We know that if we want to get something to stick, when we have high pressure, we can do it with a low time. At the extreme end here is explosion welding, where they take 2 sheets of material, put explosives on top, and detonate it. Pow! Insane pressure over a very small amount of time. My understanding now is that that's more of an interlocking than a diffusion bond, but at the other end of the extreme is when they're diffusion bonding crazy complex small heat exchangers, and they need the lowest pressure possible in order to get the least amount of deformation. We know that we can get stuff to stick with high temperature, requiring less pressure and time. We know this because we can heat up steel white hot, just touch it together and it'll stick. But when it's 850 degrees Celsius, we got to beat the crap out of it with the steam hammer. But the elephant in the room as it relates to titanium and steel is, of course, the more you increase temperature and time, the more intermetallics are formed. It's just like a high school chemistry experiment. The more temperature, the more excited the atoms, the faster the reaction. It's why this bar of steel will stay looking like this for hundreds of years, but a couple hours at high temperature, the oxygen reacts with the iron like crazy, turning it to iron oxide at an incredible rate. So with this, we're left with the only thing we can maximize being the pressure, and that time at temperature needs to be reduced as much as possible. And so the idea he presented was bond the titanium straight to the steel as quick as possible, with as much pressure as possible, and then immediately quench it. Heated, bonded, hardened in one shot. And that's why we're going to be trying it right now to see how it compares to our other freshly heat-treated samples. Here's the plan. I'm going to preheat to about 700 Celsius in the gas forge, then take it to the heat-treating oven to get it up to 850 Celsius. We'll come out of here, boom, 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 quench. What you reckon, huh? Think it's going to work? Okay, preheating. Okay. Oven. I'm doing the preheat so that we get as little time at temperature as possible. I want it to heat up as quick as possible, and the gas forge is going to heat it up quicker. Come on, Betty. Go time. Are we ready? It's hot. On goes the power hammer. Quench. That's wild to do. There's the argon bubbling out. That's so cool. All right, we're going to need to run a slightly different order of operations because obviously I'm not going to be able to cut the hardened steel and process it to size. And also, if you leave steel hardened but not tempered for too long, the steel itself can break. So we're going to dump the heat out of the kiln, temper it as soon as possible, and this is then going to be the perfect time to use the water jet again, because it will be impossible to bandsaw the hardened steel. All right, machine just finished. Now we're going to break the little Kit Kats out. Oh my goodness, that looks like it's welded. The much dirtier mild steel jacket, of course, doesn't look like it's bonded. You see that big line there? But in there, it looks like one piece. That jacket fell right off. Woo! Damn, that's cool. That's direct bonded steel and titanium straight off the wazer. Oh, that looks good. This looks promising. And that is all of the heat-treated samples, minus those poor fellas. But it is worth noting we have a minor delamination at the top of 2, a minor delamination at the bottom of 5. The delamination on 2 is between the grade 5 and the grade 2 titanium, though. Delamination on 5 is between the steel and the copper. Let's get to testing. Oh my goodness, that was pretty good. Oh, broken the titanium. Oh, there's plenty of delamination though anyway. Madness. Oh, that was bad. No longer attached. That was a delamination between the nickel and the steel. Poor thing. We're obviously not doing 6 and 7. 8, our titanium control. Broke at the grade 5, grade 2 interface. 9, our steel control. I can't pull on it. Oh my gosh! We got delamination. Hey, hey. I guess we found one of the downsides of forge welding steel at 850 degrees Celsius. Look at those insides. Funny little circular features in there. Our direct bond to steel, number 10. Oh my gosh, it's amazing! Ow! No way! No way! What have we done? It's intact! That was hard to pull on. We're looking at a strong contender here. This might be the recipe. Yes! It didn't break at the joint between the steel and the titanium. That is a break at the grade 5 titanium interface with the grade 2 titanium layer. And that was hard to pull. Unbelievable. I can't believe it. I think we've just done something really cool. I think this means we can try making a knife from it. A titanium-clad steel cord knife. And is stronger than hardened steel and stronger than just titanium. I guess that's what you get when you ask a professor that's been studying diffusion bonding his whole career for ideas. If you were to ask 16-year-old me what I would be doing as an adult at 9:45 on a Wednesday evening, I would not have ever told you it would involve bar charts and data analysis. The results are very interesting to look at. Of course, I think there's a clear winner. It turns out it didn't perform as well as just the 1080 steel in terms of the peak forces that were achieved while we were bending it, but the final failure wasn't quite as catastrophic. What's very interesting in the data is that of all of the nickel and copper interlayers, every single sample performed worse once the steel was hardened than before it was hardened. And even just on that first little bit of yield where it starts to bend, I wouldn't have expected that. The final test that I want to do with the pieces that did successfully harden is I want to put an edge on them. We've only tested a very small component of how a knife needs to be able to withstand the forces of work. Admittedly, it was a bit extreme, but how are these bonds going to hold up when we put an edge on them? Kiln is hot. We're going to gather up our remaining samples. Skip those two. Don't need that. Already heat treated. And let's get these things heat treated. We've got the anodizing set up on the bench, DC power supply, negative on the anode, baking soda electrolyte. The reason we've got to try anodizing this is exactly why we're trying to be able to make titanium-clad steel. It's so that we can get the crazy colors that anodized titanium provides, alongside steel and hopefully even Damascus steel. So the anodizing isn't a perfect process yet. This is definitely going to need some time. I'd love to hear any of your guys' ideas. Would love to hear your thoughts. There's definitely something cool there, but I think it can go further. Next up, we need to test these edges. Here's what I'm going to try. We've got this bronze filler rod, and we're going to start cutting it in the vise. See how that edge holds up. One cut on the steel control. Feels okay. holding up pretty well so far. Oh no, it's definitely deforming. We've definitely got a little bit of deformation there. Let's do 3 cuts on all the other pieces. Bloody hell, held up better than the first one. That's sample 1. Very impressive. This is sick. This will be funny. This is a titanium edge. That, my friends, is why you can't make an edge from titanium. That is nuts. Number 10 is up next, Golden Child. Oh, no. I had such high hopes. That's not great. Our steel core wasn't strong enough. It deformed. No good. I think it's about time I bought a Rockwell hardness tester, because that would be a very important metric to compare as we are planning for the best process. What did we find? The nickel interlayer samples and the copper interlayer samples. That steel core performed just as well as it did on our control. However, it was no surprise that the titanium control failed miserably, but it was a surprise to have the edge roll on our direct bond sample number 10, and that was very disappointing. Now, something I'm considering here is this. All of these samples were quenched when they were at this dimension. However, this was quenched when it was in a big block that it was then subsequently water jet cut out of. So potentially, the material that became the edge on these samples was able to cool quick enough to harden properly, and the material that became the edge on this sample, because it was stuck inside that big billet, did not cool fast enough, and therefore did not reach as high a hardness, causing the edge roll. I just need a Rockwell hardness tester. Is this actually softer? And then with the numbers, we then got to refine the process. But it is a bit frustrating, because about 24 hours ago, I was ecstatic with the results of this bonding technique, and now I am not so ecstatic. Here is all the data that I gathered, if you're curious. I'm also going to publish a little post on my website if you want to dive deeper. As ever, I'd love to hear from you. I sincerely appreciate having your time, especially on something as niche as this. Thank you. I hope you have a great day. Bye-bye.